Assalamu alaikum. I am MS Mazhar from Nova CSS Academy Islamabad, and in this video I will tell you how to start to learn how to write and become an experienced writer. My dear students, in order to learn how to write, you have to first of all familiarize yourself with all the four basic writing skills or the four basic types of discourse, all the four basic types of paragraphs. You know that there are four basic types of paragraphs. One is description or descriptive paragraph writing. Second one is called exposition or expository paragraph writing. Third one is called narration or narrative paragraph writing. And the fourth one is called persuasion or persuasive paragraph writing. In order to start your writing practice, first of all, you have to start with the descriptive paragraph writing. It is very suitable for the beginners. Descriptive paragraph writing is that stage of writing which is usually introduced to the school children at school level, particularly at primary school level. Now, what is descriptive paragraph writing or what is descriptive writing? You have to understand that descriptive writing is writing about a person, writing about a thing, writing about an animal, writing about a place. It can be writing about a situation. It can be description of a scene, etc. In order to easily understand what is descriptive paragraph writing, just imagine that you have seen something, say an elephant, but I have never seen an elephant. Now you are looking at the elephant and providing me all the vivid details about that elephant, that is your object, that is in front of your eyes, in the form of your sentences, using vivid language in such a way that I am able to go through your paragraph, go through your sentences, and successfully make a mental picture of your object, that is the elephant. While you are describing something, you always start using simple sentences, but you make use of proper adjectives. You can also make use of similes. You should also make use of metaphors. I would also recommend that you make use of hyperbole, etc. I hope that most of you are familiar with the concept of similes when you compare two things on the basis of a common quality or characteristics between them. For example, you may say that his face was as pale as death, or you can say that her eyes were as blue as the ocean. Sometimes you directly compare two things. For example, he said that Asad was a lion or Jawad was an eagle. These are the examples of the use of metaphor. Sometimes you make use of hyperbole, which is the use of exaggeration. You say that he was as tall as a pole, or you can say that he was so hungry that he would eat the entire camel, or he was so thirsty that he would eat the entire river. This is the use of hyperbole. My dear students, now I will tell you about the second type of paragraph or the second writing skills or second type of discourse, which is about exposition or an expository paragraph writing. Expository paragraph writing is when you are describing some process or a phenomenon or a situation, medical conditions. For example, I can give you an example of a paragraph on the global warming or the scourge of domestic violence in Pakistan. These would be very good examples of expository writing. In expository writing, you make a lot of research, you authenticate your research, and then you provide all the details about that situation or that particular process or that phenomenon in such a way that the reader is properly educated. The major objective of expository writing is to educate your reader on the basis of researches that you have made and authenticated. You try to give the answers to questions what, when, where, how many, how much, etc. For example, when you are writing about the scourge of domestic violence in Pakistan, you will define what, in your opinion, is domestic violence. Is it violence occurring only against women inside the four walls of the house, inside the boundary of the house? or this is the violence that is also perpetrated against other members of the family. After defining this thing, you will also start giving data, statistics, and other details. Where is domestic violence? Where is the prevalence of domestic violence more than other places? And how is domestic violence conducted? What are the effects of domestic violence? What are the effects of domestic violence on different members of the family and different segments of the society, etc., etc. Because this is also a sort of problem, you can also talk about some of the recommendations and solutions with the help of which this domestic violence can be minimized in our country. Third type of writing is called narration or a narrative paragraph or a narrative essay. You know that narrative writing is about story. When you are actually narrating an event, there are some of the very basic elements of story writing which you should understand. You know that story is always based on a chain of events. There is one event that gives birth to the next event, that gives birth to the third event, that gives birth to the fourth event, and so on. So, what is very important for all story writers that first of all they decide an order of different events on the basis of which they will complete their story from the first event to the last event. Now, when they make a proper logical order of their events, this is called making of the plot. So one very, very essential element of story writing is making of the plot, which is basically ordering of different events on the basis of which you complete your story from the first event to the last event. Another very important element of narrative writing is called action. If I try to make you understand what do I mean by action, actually action is, technically speaking, the development of the story, the movement of the story from one event to the next event. Events just do not occur in the story suddenly without any causes, without any reasons, without any factors. So all those causes, reasons, factors which give birth to the next event are called the action of the story. With the help of action, the story keeps on advancing from one event to the next event to the next event and so on. Another very, very essential and basic and important element of story writing is called character. You must understand that all stories are based on characters. Sometimes there is only one character in the story. Sometimes there are two characters in the story. Sometimes there are so many characters in the story. Here, I would not be telling you about the art of characterization, about the external description of the character, about the internal description of the character, about the qualities of the character, about the dispensations of the character. But you have to understand that characterization is a very important thing to learn, and characterization is one of the basic elements of story writing. There are different types of characters: the main character, the antagonist, the protagonist is the main character, then there is antagonist. You are familiar with so many stories, and you know that in most of the stories there is a hero, there is a villain, there can be certain other supporting characters. So stories are impossible to build without characters and without understanding the art of characterization. Now I tell you about another very important element of story, that is called conflict. You will come to understand that almost all stories are based on conflict, which can be a sort of clash between two different characters or between two groups of characters. Sometimes there is only one character in the story, like we have seen in Ernest Hemingway's very famous novel, The Old Man and the Sea. There is almost only one main character in the story. And the story is revolving every time about that main character, that is perhaps Santiago. But then, where is the conflict? This is the conflict between the main character of the story and the forces of nature. Sometimes it is the conflict between a character and the forces of nature, but there is always conflict. This entire story of the universe, the creation of man, the disobedience of Satan in the court of God also gave birth to this very great story in which man is a character, Satan is a character, God is a character, and this whole story is going on every time around us. We are ourselves the character of this story. So this story is also based on conflict between Satan and human being. Another very important element of story writing or narrative writing is called climax. Just some time ago, I told you about the action in the story, which is the development of the story from one event to the next event, which is the development of the story in such a way that the factors, the reasons, the causes give birth to the next event in the story in a very logical way. Now, there is always a certain point in the story where all the action of the story reaches an ultimate highest point, that is called the climax of the story, the apex point of the action in the story. The experienced readers also sometimes are in a position to determine that this event is the climax of the story, or this event sets the climax of the story. There is also another very important element of the story that is called anti-climax, and the experienced readers also understand that right after the climax starts the anti-climax. It is also in the form of an event. Anti-climax is that event which gives the message to the reader that now the tensions are decreasing, now the situation is becoming somewhat reconcilable, somewhat easy. That point is called the anticlimax, and the anticlimax always lies somewhere in between the climax of the story and the final end of the story. Another very important element that always occurs in stories, that is called resolution. I told you just some seconds ago that there is conflict in the story, and it is basically conflict that gives birth to different types of stories. Now, what is resolution? That before the end, the writer manages the events in such a way that the conflict is ultimately resolved. It does not mean that the hero and the villain actually become friends. They can become friends. It all depends on the intention of the reader, or the plan of, intention of the writer, or the plan of the writer. Sometimes the resolution may occur in the form of friendship patch up between the hero and the villain. Sometimes it comes in the form of the death of the villain. Sometimes it comes in the form of death of both the hero and the villain. Sometimes only the hero dies. Sometimes it can be managed in some other way, but there's always resolution. The conflict has actually come to an end, and the last important major element of the story is called the end, which is the last event as managed by the writer, which comes logically at a particular point where the story comes to an end. My dear students, if you want to master the writing skills, then my advice is that first of all, you start writing descriptive paragraphs. And after descriptive paragraphs, the second thing that you can add in your writing practice or writing course is start writing narrative paragraphs. Because for both of these paragraphs, you do not depend much on researches, on solid knowledge, on data, on facts and figures, authentication of facts and figures, everything. I hope you easily understand this thing. Now I will tell you about the fourth basic kind of discourse, fourth basic kind of paragraph, that is called persuasion or persuasive paragraph, the most demanding, the most difficult writing skill. Persuasion, the name suggests that I am supposed to write something in such a way about my position to justify my position that the reader is able to get convinced by my argumentation. Convincing another person is the most difficult job on earth. So, in order to understand what is persuasive writing, you have to understand that the writer always has a position, has a point of view, has a certain stance, and then with the help of reasoning, with the help of argumentation, he discusses that point of view in such a way that even the worst opponents of that writer or that point of view are able to ultimately get convinced in favor of the writer's point of view. There are some structural elements of argumentative writing or persuasive writing, because persuasive writing is always furthered with the help of argumentation. Now, you have to understand what is argumentation and how can you make strong arguments. There are always three elements of argumentation. One of them is called premise. Premise can be viewed as the foundation on the basis of which you can make your argumentation. Premise is always followed by evidence or proof of whatever you want to prove. In order to make strong arguments, you should always come up with some very concrete proof or evidence, and then you also make reasoning in such a way that you convince your reader to at least accept the validity of your evidence. And you make reasoning to develop an understanding in the mind of your reader that the evidence is very much acceptable, and then you drive a certain logical conclusion from your reasoning and the use of evidence in such a way that that conclusion becomes very much convincing and acceptable. Now, if your argument has strong evidence and if your reasoning is successful to make the reader understand the importance of that and relevance of that evidence, then you are in a position to convince your reader or persuade your reader. My dear students, making good argumentation is a very important writing skills, especially for those students who are the candidates for the competitive examination of Pakistan. It is through your argumentation that you are able to convince your readers, and in your case, when you are an examination candidate, unfortunately, you have only one reader, which is your examiner. And if you are able to convince your examiner with your evidence, its justification, its reasoning, relating your argument with the main topic, then you are inshallah in a position to convince your examiner. And when you convince your examiner, he is going to give you very good appreciation in terms of very high marks in this examination. My dear students, I hope that this video would have given you a great deal of help to understand all the four basic types of paragraphs. To the beginners, I would advise that always start your writing practice with first of all attempting descriptive paragraphs. And when you become confident that now you are in a position to handle descriptive paragraph in a very good way, then try your hand at narrative paragraph writing. Because in writing both of these paragraphs, descriptive as well as narrative, you only depend on your own observations and experience, but you do not depend on any researches or specific knowledge. However, when it comes to expository paragraph writing or expository essays and ultimately persuasive essays or argumentative paragraph writing, then you have to always come up with great deal of convincing and authentic research, which means that after mastering the basic two writing skills, then start making researches and then start trying your hand at expository as well as persuasive writing. My dear students, I am hopeful that this video would have given you a great deal of help to understand basic writing skills. Thank you very much for watching this video. Allah Hafiz.